In the heart of the alien city stood the Arena of Death, a place built from black stone and glowing metal, where thousands of alien voices rose like thunder every time a fight began, and on this night the stands were filled with creatures from every corner of the Empire, their scales and horns shining under the strange blue lights that hung high above, their eyes fixed on the iron gates at the far end of the arena, for they knew what was coming. They knew the Empire was about to unleash its most feared weapon once again, a monster so brutal that even the strongest warriors of other species had never walked out alive, and the crowd screamed for blood, banging their claws and fists against the stone rails, hungry for another execution masked as entertainment, and the air shook with excitement, with fear, with cruelty, until the gates creaked open and instead of some giant soldier or armored beast, a single figure was pushed into the sand, stumbling forward under the weight of silence. Because for the first time in living memory, the Empire had thrown a human into the pit, and the aliens roared with laughter, mocking cries echoing across the stone walls. For to them, humans were weak prey, fragile animals, a race thought long. Extinct after the Great Cleansing Wars, a species remembered only as servants and slaves, not as warriors, and yet here stood one of them in the circle of death. His body small compared to the size of the arena, his clothes torn and stained, his bare hands empty, his face calm, too calm, as though the storm of voices meant nothing to him, as though the fear that should have broken him never touched his heart. And the crowd laughed harder, some shouting how long he would last, 10 seconds, 20 at most, others betting if he would run or cry before the end. But the man did not move, his dark eyes steady on the other side of the arena where another gate trembled, and a deeper rumble began, the ground shaking as something enormous slammed against. The bars from within, a sound like thunder mixed with steel, and silence fell in waves, for the monster was about to be released, the beast bred for war, armored from head to claw, with long curved blades for arms and a mouth filled with jagged teeth that could rip a man apart in one strike, and when the bars fell open, the creature stepped into the light, 20 feet tall, its shadow swallowing the human like a mountain swallows a stone, its roar echoing through the arena so loud that even the bravest aliens flinched. And yet the human still did not move. He did not scream, he did not run, he simply stood there with his back straight and his face unreadable. And in that stillness, a strange tension spread, for the crowd expected fear. They wanted panic, but instead they saw calm. And calm was dangerous. Calm was unnatural. Calm meant something they could not understand. And for the first time in centuries, the arena was not filled only with cruel joy, but with unease, as if the walls themselves waited to see what would happen next. And the monster growled low, its steps shaking the ground, its blades dragging lines across the stone as it moved closer. And still the human watched, eyes narrowed, lips pressed together, and in those eyes there was no surrender, no weakness, only a quiet fire. And the audience leaned forward, whispers breaking through the silence, questions spreading like sparks. Why was he not afraid? Why did he not kneel? Why did he not run? And though no answer came, the tension deepened. For somewhere inside that calm, inside that stillness, there was a promise of something hidden, something the aliens had forgotten, something they had never understood. And in that moment, the fight was no longer just a show. It was a mystery, a question hanging heavy in the air. What secret did this human carry that allowed him to stand unshaken before death itself? The monster's roar shook the arena until dust fell from the ceiling, its body glowing faintly under the lights as it dragged its bladed arms against the ground with a screech of metal on stone, and every alien in the stands leaned forward to watch the kill that they believed was already certain. Yet their laughter faded into nervous whispers when they noticed the human still standing motionless, his hands loose at his sides, his eyes locked on the creature as though measuring it. as though studying not a monster but a puzzle waiting to be solved, and some of the alien leaders, seated high in their private balconies, exchanged quick words, asking each other why this prey looked so calm, why this fragile remnant of a dead race did not beg, did not cry, did not even tremble, and down below the man, whose name was Ryan Holt, though the crowd did not know it, breathed slowly, whispering words no one could hear, words of focus, words of memory, because in his mind he was no longer in the arena, he was back in the shadowed ruins of Earth, where he had trained in silence, where the last soldiers of humanity had taught him how to read enemies larger than himself, how to find weakness where none was supposed to exist, and his heartbeat slowed as the monster took its first lunging step. Toward him, claws cutting deep into the sand, its massive weight shaking the ground so hard that cracks split across the stone floor, and the aliens roared again, demanding blood, demanding speed, demanding that their weapon tear the human apart in one strike. But Ryan did not move. His boots dug lightly into the sand, his shoulders relaxed, his gaze sharp, and the monster paused for the briefest second, as though sensing something different about this small opponent, something not written into its training, and then with another roar it charged, its speed shocking for a creature so large, blades raised to strike, jaws opening to bite, a storm of fury and destruction rushing forward. And still Ryan waited until the very last moment, his eyes flicking to the joints of the armor, the rhythm of its steps, the slight imbalance of its left leg where the plating overlapped too heavily, details no one else in the arena saw because they were blinded by fear or excitement. But he saw. And he whispered again under his breath, not to the crowd, not to the monster, but to himself, to the ghosts of his people, promising he would not fall. And then he moved, not wildly, not desperately, but with precision, sliding one step to the side so smoothly it looked like he had vanished, the monster's blade slamming down into empty sand, throwing sparks as it tore through stone, and the crowd gasped. The first real sound of shock in centuries of blood games, because the prey had not died, the prey had dodged, and as dust rose around them, Ryan's figure appeared again, calm, controlled, his hand brushing the sand from his clothes as though nothing had happened, and the aliens shouted louder, some in anger, some in disbelief, some suddenly unsure if what they were watching was still a simple execution, while up in the shadows of the royal balcony, a commander of the Empire leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he remembered old stories told by soldiers long ago. Stories of humans who could move faster than fear, who could see cracks in armor no one else could see. Stories, dismissed as lies because the humans had been destroyed, erased, hunted to extinction, and yet here stood one in flesh and blood, proving the stories might have been truth all along, and in that moment the arena changed, no longer a stage for cruelty, but a stage for revelation. And the crowd, despite their mockery, despite their pride, leaned closer, unable to look away, waiting to see if this calm human could do the impossible again, waiting to see how long this dance of death would last before the monster's fury swallowed him whole. And somewhere inside the silence between heartbeats, Ryan's voice whispered, once more, low, steady, unbroken, I am not prey. The monster lunged again with a roar that cracked the air, its blades slicing through the space where Ryan had stood a heartbeat earlier, sparks and sand exploding upward as stone shattered under the weight of its strike, and the crowd screamed, in delight, believing the human was caught, believing the fight was already over. But through the rising cloud of dust, a figure moved like shadow, quick and precise, and Ryan slipped under the arc of the monster's swing, rolling to his feet with a grace that seemed impossible for a man facing such size. And when he turned his head, there was no fear in his eyes, only sharp calculation, the kind of focus that soldiers carried when they saw not a beast but a target. And in that instant, he saw it again, the slight delay in the monster's left step, the heavier weight on one joint where the armor bent wrong, the hidden weakness that no alien engineer believed could be noticed, let alone used. And the crowd had no time to laugh before Ryan moved, faster than their eyes could follow, sprinting, forward toward death instead of away from it. And the monster reacted with another furious strike, its blade dropping like a guillotine meant to split him in two, but he slid low, sand spraying from under his boots, and his hand grabbed a shard of broken stone, torn free from the ground by the monster's first attack, sharp enough to cut, small enough to wield, and he drove it upward into the exposed joint at the back of the creature's knee with all the force his body could give, a crack of impact echoing as the monster howled, stumbling for the first time in its life, a sound of pain. No alien in the arena had ever heard from this weapon before, and gasps spread across the stands as the impossible became real. Their unstoppable beast wounded by bare hands, by a human, by prey, and blood that shimmered dark green spilled onto the sand, the sight silencing the laughter of thousands. For silence had never lived in this place until now, and Ryan did not wait. He rose with swift steps, circling, his eyes still locked on the creature's joints, his breath steady even as sweat ran down his skin, his body carrying the training of hidden years, the discipline of warriors who had taught him that monsters were not gods, only flesh, only systems. And every system has a flaw, and above him the alien generals shifted in their seats, their sharp tongues suddenly still, their confidence cracked. For they had seen hundreds of champions fall in this arena, but never had their monster been struck, never had their certainty been broken. And yet here a lone human had done it in less than a minute, and the question spread like fire. Was he alone? Was this just one survivor? Or was this proof of something worse, that humanity still lived, that humanity still remembered how to fight? And while the crowd wrestled with that fear, Ryan pressed forward, his shard of stone still gripped in his hand, his mind sharper than the weapon he carried, his voice silent as he moved again, circling as the monster regained its balance. Rage filling its glowing eyes, its roar shaking the ground, and when it came again with both blades sweeping wide, he ducked low, slipping between its legs with speed that blurred his outline and struck once more at the weak point. Deeper this time, harder, twisting the shard until the monster screamed and fell to one knee, its roar now mixed with fury and agony, and the audience, once loud with cruel joy, sat frozen, unable to cheer, unable to breathe, for they were witnessing something their empire had told them was impossible, something that should have been erased from history, and up in the highest balcony, the emperor himself leaned forward, claws tight on the railing, his face a mask of anger and doubt as he stared at the human who had just shattered centuries of lies. And below, in the sand, Ryan stood calm, his chest rising with steady breaths, his gaze fixed on the beast that still tried to rise despite its wounds. And in that moment, surrounded by enemies and watched by thousands, he whispered to himself the words his people had carried through exile and ruin. Words no alien could hear, but words that filled his veins with fire. Every giant can fall. The beast collapsed onto one knee, its blades dragging grooves through the stone floor as it fought to rise, roaring in fury, its green blood dripping thick onto the sand and steaming in the strange light. But no roar from the creature could match the silence that had fallen across the arena. Because for the first time in its long history, there were no cheers, no cruel laughter, only stunned eyes watching the impossible unfold before them. And in the center of that silence stood Ryan Holt, calm and steady, his chest rising and falling with slow breaths, as though he had not just faced a monster twice the size of a war machine, as though he had been waiting for this fight his whole life. And his gaze did not wander to the terrified faces in the stands, nor to the generals shifting uncomfortably in their private seats, nor even to the emperor who leaned forward with claws clenched tight on the railing of his balcony. Instead, his eyes stayed locked on the wounded beast that trembled before him. Because he knew the fight was not yet finished. He knew a monster built for war never surrendered. And with a groan that shook the ground, the creature forced itself up, towering once more, though its movements were slower now, clumsier, the weakness in its leg tearing open with each step, and the crowd gasped again, unable to look away as their weapon bled in front of them, a sight they had never believed possible. And when the beast raised its bladed arms high, preparing one final desperate strike, Ryan did not retreat. He did not flinch. Instead, he stepped forward into the shadow. Of death, his shard of stone gripped tight in his hand. And as the blades came crashing down, he slipped sideways, faster than fear itself, and drove the shard deep into the monster's chest joint, where the armor split for air, twisting until the scream that tore from the creature's mouth became a death cry that shook the very walls of the arena, and then the beast staggered, collapsing forward with a thunderous crash that sent dust and blood spraying into the night, its lifeless body sprawling across the sand while Ryan stepped back, his clothes torn and stained, his face still calm, his dark eyes lifting not toward the body of his fallen enemy, but toward the balcony of rulers high above. And in that moment, the silence deepened into something heavier than fear, because no one had ever walked out alive from such a fight. No one had ever killed the Empire's greatest monster. And now a human, a species they believed extinct, had done it before their very eyes, and across the stands whispers began to ripple. Questions the Empire had buried for centuries, questions dangerous enough to break the illusion of their rule. Was humanity truly gone? Or had they survived in secret? Had they hidden their strength while the galaxy forgot? And if one man could do this, what could an army of them do? And the Emperor's claws dug so deep into the railing that cracks formed. His face twisted in anger, but behind the rage flickered something he had not felt in generations. Doubt, because he knew this was no accident, no trick of luck. This was skill, training, power, and power that came from somewhere. And in the sand below, Ryan stood tall, lifting his voice for the first time so that it carried across the stunned arena, his tone steady, cold, filled with quiet defiance. "Your monster is dead," he said, pointing his shard toward the balcony where the rulers sat. "Now send me your real weapon." And the words echoed in the silent chamber like thunder, sending shivers through even the most hardened warriors. Because this was not the cry of prey. This was the challenge of a predator. A reminder that the galaxy had misjudged humanity, and as the alien lords looked down upon him, unsure if they were staring at a relic of the past or the beginning of their end, the crowd that once demanded his death sat frozen, knowing deep inside that the arena had just become something greater than a stage for blood. It had become the place where the return of mankind had been announced. High above the arena, in the shadowed chambers of the rulers, panic spread like fire hidden beneath the stone, alien generals whispering sharp words to one another, their scaled hands trembling as they spoke of things forbidden, because the sight they had just witnessed shattered everything the Empire had told its people for centuries. And behind their jeweled masks of power, their voices betrayed fear, for they remembered the war long ago when humanity had stood against them, when men and women fought not with the numbers of the Empire, but with cunning, with fire, with will that bent even stronger races to their command. And though the Empire had claimed victory, though they had scorched the earth and declared mankind extinct, whispers always lingered among soldiers who survived that war. Whispers that humanity had not died but hidden, had not been broken, but had retreated into the shadows to prepare, and now staring down at the lone survivor in the arena, a human who had slain their greatest beast. Those whispers no longer felt like stories. They felt like truth, and Ryan Holt, standing tall in the blood-stained sand, knew exactly what he was doing, because his calm was not only for himself, it was a signal, a performance for every pair of eyes watching. He wanted the rulers to question. He wanted the crowd to fear, because the arena was not just a prison to him. It was a stage, and his survival was not an accident. It was a message, a seed planted in the heart of the Empire that would grow into rebellion. And in his silence, he remembered the faces of those who had trained him in hidden colonies on distant rocks where the stars hid them from alien patrols. The last fragments of humanity who taught him that victory was not about strength of arms, alone, but about breaking the enemy's belief. And tonight, belief was already breaking. For the crowd that once mocked him now whispered with unease, their jeers replaced with questions. And questions were more dangerous to the Empire than any weapon. And Rian's thoughts drifted back to the night he was chosen. The night the hidden council of survivors sent him away, telling him he would not just fight to live, he would fight to remind the galaxy that humans still walked among them, that humanity still carried fire in its veins. And as he stared up at the balcony where the Emperor's eyes burned with silent fury, he let that memory sharpen into resolve. Because this was only the beginning. This victory was not an escape. It was a warning shot. And somewhere above the arena, far beyond the Empire's skies, hidden ships waited. Fleets that had been building in secret for generations, their engines silent, their weapons sleeping. Their pilots watching, waiting for a signal, waiting for proof that the time had come. And Ryan knew that proof was here, painted in green blood across the sand, carved into silence across the throats of the Empire's rulers. And though the Emperor's voice finally thundered across the arena, declaring the fight was not finished, that another challenge would be unleashed, his words carried a weight of desperation rather than command, and the crowd heard it, the generals heard it, and even the soldiers hidden behind the walls heard it, and all of them, whether they admitted it or not, felt the same cold truth. They had seen a human do the impossible, and if one could do it, perhaps more could, and the fear that had once belonged to humanity now began to turn in the other direction, creeping into the hearts of those who believed themselves untouchable. And Ryan lifted his bloodied shard one more time, his voice low but carrying across the arena like a knife through silence. "I am not here to survive," he said, his words sharp and steady. "I am here so you remember us." And with those words, the secret of humanity was no longer hidden. It was alive, burning, spreading in every whisper, every fearful glance, every crack in the Empire's mask of power. And deep inside, the rulers knew this night had already changed the galaxy forever. The Emperor rose from his throne, his voice like a blade cutting through the heavy silence, and though he tried to sound calm, his fury leaked into every word as he declared that the fight was not finished, that the human would not leave this place alive. And with a sharp signal of his claw, the far gates of the arena trembled, heavier than before, thicker chains rattling as something vast slammed against the bars from within. And the crowd, already shaken by the death of their monster, gasped in terror as a new roar echoed, deeper, darker, a sound that carried not only fury, but hunger. And even the generals in their balcony shifted uneasily. For this was not the beast the crowd had seen before. This was something worse, a creation, whispered about only in shadows, the weapon behind the weapon, the monster behind the monster, a creature born not of nature but of design, a fusion of flesh and machine built in secret labs, armored not just with steel but with alien technology that pulsed with light. And when the gates exploded open with a thunderous crash, the abomination stepped forward, its body taller than the last beast, its arms heavy with blades that glowed with energy, its chest humming with machinery that pumped blood like molten fire through veins of metal, and its head twisted with wires, its eyes glowing red as though it no longer saw prey but targets. And the crowd, instead of cheering, fell, silent again, because even they feared what their empire had unleashed. And in the sand below, Ryan tightened his grip on the shard, his heart steady, though deep inside he knew this was no simple beast. This was a weapon made to kill anything that dared resist. And as it stepped closer, he slid a hand into the hidden fold of his torn clothes, fingers brushing against a small device no bigger than a coin, a signal transmitter carved from ancient human design, the one he had carried for years waiting for this moment. Because this fight was not about survival anymore, it was about calling the hidden fleet, the survivors waiting in the dark corners of space, the exiles who dreamed of returning. And though no one around him understood, every movement he made was part of a greater plan. Because this arena was not just a prison, it was the stage for humanity's return, and as the creature roared, the sound rattling stone and shaking the bones of everyone present, Rian whispered into the silence of his own heart, promising he would hold until the signal was answered, promising he would not fall before the eyes of those who needed hope, and the abomination charged with impossible speed, its blades slicing through the ground and sending shards flying like bullets. But Ryan leapt aside, rolling through the dust, his shard flashing in his hand, though he knew stone alone would never pierce this monster, not when it was built to withstand cannons, and yet he faced it head-on, dodging, moving, searching for rhythm, for the flaw every system carried, while high above the Emperor leaned forward with a cruel smile returning to his face, certain this time the human would fall, certain this new creation could not be stopped. But deep inside, even he could not silence the seed of fear that grew. As he watched the man below, a human who had already shattered their perfect weapon once, and as the abomination raised its glowing blades again, the crowd's whispers spread. No longer cruel, but sharp with doubt, because though they feared the monster, their eyes returned again and again to the lone figure standing firm in the sand, a man without armor, without weapons, without fear, and somewhere beyond the stars, ships waited, hidden, silent, listening for the spark that would awaken them. And as the monster struck again, Ryan braced himself, his thumb brushing the signal device, his mind clear with one thought. This was not just a fight. This was the moment. The galaxy would learn that humanity had never died. It had only been waiting. The abomination charged like a storm of fire and steel, its glowing blades carving the air with deadly arcs, sparks flying with every strike as the ground shook beneath its monstrous weight. And the crowd screamed not with joy but with terror. Because this creature was not meant to be seen in the open, it was the Empire's hidden terror, and now it stalked the arena like a god of war. Yet in the middle of that chaos, Ryan Holt stood tall, his body bruised, his clothes torn, the shard of stone still gripped in his hand, though he knew it could not cut the machine. But his eyes burned with a calm fire that no weapon could erase, and as the beast's shadow fell over him, he pressed his thumb against the small signal device hidden in his sleeve, a soft pulse of blue light flashing once. Silent to all but the heavens, and across the void of space, far beyond the sight of the Empire, ships that had slept for generations stirred awake. Hidden fleets rising from the darkness of forgotten star fields, human warships carved from the bones of old worlds, their engines roaring as if the ghosts of Earth themselves had breathed life into them. And in that moment the arena became more than a stage of blood. It became the beacon of humanity's return, and Rian knew he had to hold until the signal was answered. So when the abomination's blade came crashing down, he slid aside, his movements sharp, precise, a soldier dancing with death, striking when he could at the wires and joints, each spark, reminding the crowd that even the mightiest machine could be touched, and the Emperor above shouted in fury, his claws tearing grooves in the railing, his voice breaking as he ordered the creature to finish it. But even his words sounded desperate now, because deep inside, he knew what the others were beginning to see, that this human was not fighting alone, that he carried with him the strength of something greater, and then it happened. The sky above the arena split with thunder as shadows darker than night fell across the city, massive shapes blocking the stars, and when the lights of their hulls ignited, the crowd gasped as one. Because they were not alien ships, they were human, sleek and powerful, fleets that should not exist, fleets the Empire had sworn were destroyed long ago, and the whispers turned to cries, to panic, to fear, for the galaxy's forgotten enemy had returned in force, and Ryan, hearing the roar of engines above, allowed the faintest smile to touch his lips as he faced the abomination once more, his voice rising strong and clear so that every ear in the arena heard him. "Your empire ends tonight," he said, and with one final surge, he hurled himself toward the monster, driving his shard of stone into a sparking joint near its chest, where metal met flesh. And though the weapon should have withstood blades and cannons, somehow it faltered, shuddering under the weight of a man who refused to break, collapsing in a storm of sparks and screams until its red eyes dimmed and its body lay shattered in the sand beside the first beast, and the silence that followed was heavier than any roar, because in that silence every alien knew the truth they had been told to forget, that humans were not prey, that humans were not weak, that humans had never died. And when Ryan lifted his gaze to the Emperor's balcony, his face lit by the glow of warships descending from the skies, he raised his bloodied hand and pointed. Straight at the throne, his voice steady and cold. "This arena is ours now," he declared, and the crowd erupted, not with cheers for their ruler, but with chaos, with fear, with the first sparks of rebellion. And as the fleets above unleashed their fire into the night sky, the Empire's mask of control cracked forever, for the galaxy that once believed humanity. Extinct now saw the truth. Humanity had returned, stronger, sharper, united by survival. And as Ryan stood in the blood-stained sand of the arena that was meant to be his grave, he knew this was not the end of the war, but the beginning. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, billions of voices would soon learn to speak the words the Empire most feared. Humans are back.